By 9:47 a.m., a multi-billion-dollar transportation web was beginning its public, spectacular disintegration, and all I had done was lose my job and dispatch a courteous email. They brand it logistics. I knew it as the invisible art of chaperoning millions of tons of metal, rubber, and fragile human cargo across the continent at lethal velocities. My name is Renee Miller. For over 2 decades, I was the unnoticed pillar at National Freight Alliance, the person who kept intricate contracts afloat through favors, frantic calls, and a profound, deeply unglamorous understanding of what fails first when the heat is on. If you've ever tasted ripe fruit in the dead of winter, got a new generator after a blackout, or benefited from a pharmacy that didn't run out of critical meds during a dock strike, you've indirectly relied on the expertise of people in my position. My official designation was Senior Contract Liaison, corporate jargon for the woman who knows precisely which vendor is about to bolt, which local union is primed to strike, and which arcane clause can make a smug VP remember his manners in an instant. I didn't possess a corner office with a city view. My domain was a modest cubicle that permanently smelled of scorched coffee and overworked electronics. I cherished its anonymity. Silence is a tool. It allows you to perceive the machinery straining before it shatters. And let me be clear, I didn't plan to be a savior. I certainly didn't plan to be an avenger. My only intention was to execute my duties. When National Freight made that impossible, I simply stopped performing them on their behalf. Here's the critical detail that often gets overlooked. The unraveling began not with a bang but with a retirement. It was more like a quiet withdrawal. Wallace Sterling, the founder of National Freight Alliance, stepped down to pursue a quiet life abroad, a place designed to make him forget about fluctuating fuel surcharges. Wallace was a rough, decisive old-school operator who understood freight. We had an unspoken pact. I maintained his roots, and he let me do it without a leash. Then his son took over. Julian Sterling, barely 30, an MBA polished to a mirror shine, a wardrobe that cost more than some trucks, and a level of self-belief he inherited, not earned. He descended upon the company with the confidence of a man who'd never had to clean up a mess he made. Right away, he started upgrading. He installed a complicated espresso machine in the break room that no one knew how to maintain. He outsourced the cleaning staff to cut costs. And by the first week, our restrooms were a biohazard. By his 3rd month, he was conducting a tour of our floor with a woman named Camille with a C, the newly appointed director of workplace culture and vibes. Her primary function seemed to be to follow him around and offer a sycophantic laugh at every word he uttered. I kept my head down, focused on the work. I'd endured market crashes, a pandemic, and a cyber attack that sent us back to paper maps and flip phones. I could outlast a single entitled executive, or so I reassured myself. The conflict didn't erupt in one dramatic showdown. It was a slow, grinding friction like sand working its way into the gears of a precision engine. Julian resented my legacy. He despised that I'd pick up the phone rather than fire off a chirpy message on a new internal platform. He seemed irritated by my lack of performative enthusiasm. The moment I knew our collision was unavoidable was a random Tuesday. I was deep in negotiations for a critical renewal with the Gulf Coast Longshoremen's Union, the kind of people who operate without bluffing and possess elephantine memories. I was on the line with their representative, a towering man they called Big Pete, trying to whittle down a rate increase to something we could absorb. Julian glided by with Camille in tow and without pausing announced, "Renee, we need to discuss your workstation. It's a chaotic mess. Very poor visual presentation." My desk was a controlled explosion of bills of lading, shipping manifests, and handwritten notes, the literal operational nerve center. I covered the receiver and replied, "I'm in the middle of finalizing the Gulf contract. If I stop to declutter this desk, we lose our New Orleans pipeline." He stopped, turned, and gave me a smile people reserve for those they've already written off. "We have a program for that now. Scan it all to the cloud, kill the paper. It's almost 2025. He then moved on, Camille's laugh tinkling behind him like a broken music box. Big Pete was still waiting. "Everything all right, Ren?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. "Perfect," I said, my mind already calculating the damage. "Just a minor distraction. Now let's revisit that overtime clause." I saved the deal. It made National Freight millions. My reward was a company-wide email from HR about maintaining a clean desk policy. A few weeks later, Julian decided to escalate the conflict from professional to personal. Mid-October, the peak of the shipping season. Every retailer on the continent was demanding their merchandise simultaneously: Halloween candy, Thanksgiving turkeys, Christmas toys, emergency heaters. I was working brutal 12-hour shifts, fueled by caffeine and simmering resentment, when an invitation arrived in my inbox. Subject: mandatory senior staff celebration of visionary leadership. It was Julian's birthday gala at the Sterling estate. Mandatory for senior personnel. On a Saturday. The busiest Saturday of the year, when import containers from Asia were hitting the West Coast. It was also the same night I was personally responsible for monitoring the clearance of a massive shipment of temperature-sensitive vaccines. I sent a professional reply: Julian, happy birthday. I cannot attend. My evening is dedicated to managing a live clearance for the vaccine shipment. It requires constant oversight due to the stringent temperature requirements. Please enjoy a toast on my behalf. Best, Renee. I figured that would be the end of it. The following morning, the office atmosphere was charged with an unnatural quiet. People made eye contact, then quickly looked away. I settled into my chair, sipped my lukewarm coffee, and tried to log in. Access denied. I tried again, thinking it was a glitch. Access denied. I reached for my desk phone to call the IT help desk when I heard the click of heels and the soft scuff of expensive leather. Then a voice, deliberately loud for the audience of the open-plan floor. Renee. I turned. Julian was standing there, flanked by Camille clutching a tablet, and two security guards who wore expressions of profound professional embarrassment. Is the network down? I asked, a question I already knew the answer to. We're executing a strategic realignment, Julian said, straightening a violently bright silk tie that seemed to mock the entire concept of competence. We're moving to a dynamic leadership model. Your refusal to embrace and integrate with our team culture. He paused, savoring the moment. Demonstrates a fundamental lack of alignment. You're letting me go, I stated flatly. It's about overall synergy, Camille interjected, her voice a sharp chirp. We require people who are on our wavelength. I looked from one to the other. I am the primary signatory for our port authorities, union agreements, and customs brokers. These aren't handshakes that survive because you change the logo on a splash page. Julian laughed. Everyone is replaceable, Renee. Your badge, please. He was waiting for tears, for bluster, for me to negotiate. He got nothing. I unclipped my ID, dropped it into his open palm, grabbed my bag and the single-framed photograph of my dog, Jasper. As I walked away, I said, "Give my regards to your father." My father is unreachable, Julian snapped back. He'll find out, I said, my voice calm, when the trucks are all parked. I kept moving towards the elevator. The doors slid shut at exactly 9:13 a.m. By 9:35, the first of our trucks would be at a weigh station requiring an authorization code that existed only in my memory and in documents Julian had never bothered to read. By 9:50, the entire operation would begin to realize the magnitude of what happens when you remove the person everyone secretly relies on. In the parking lot, rain began to pelt the roof of my old SUV as I just sat there and ran the numbers. Mortgage, insurance, the humiliating sting of being discarded. But then, another part of my brain, the part forged by years of high-stakes problem-solving, kicked in. I wasn't looking at a crisis to fix for National Freight. I was the crisis. I opened my personal email account, the one Julian hadn't been able to lock. I had given this address to key vendors and union heads over the years for emergencies only. If the whole building is on fire, use this, I'd joke. Well, the building was burning, and I was the one holding the match. I didn't author a frantic manifesto. That would look like a crime. I composed something clean, precise, and legally devastating. Subject: Notification of change in signatory authority. To all concerned parties. Effective immediately, I, Renee Miller, am no longer employed with National Freight Alliance. Consequently, I am no longer the authorized signatory or operational contact for any current service agreements, rate negotiations, compliance verifications, or customs approvals. As per the Key Personnel Continuity Clause, Section 9 billions, of our master agreements. My departure triggers an automatic review and potential suspension of credit terms, pending the successful onboarding of a qualified successor. For all urgent matters, please direct inquiries to Julian Sterling, CEO. Section 9 billions was my hidden masterpiece. Years earlier, when National Freight's credit rating was poor, Wallace had asked me to negotiate with a nervous collection of vendors. I'd drafted language that gave them the power to halt services or demand cash on delivery if the designated relationship manager, me, were to leave. Vendors don't trust a corporate emblem. They trust the person who picks up the phone at 3 a.m. when a vessel is stuck on a sandbar or a shipment of citrus is at risk of spoiling. Julian didn't know Section 9 billions existed. Julian likely believed contracts were decorative. I sent the message out vendor by vendor, not as a threat but as a point of contractual compliance. Each send was like toppling a domino. My personal phone began to ring. It was Big Pete. "Ren, what is this email? I tried your desk and it just rings." "I was let go," I said. Julian said it was about cultural alignment. Big Pete let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Does he have any clue that we just signed a 3-year extension? Does he think software renegotiates?" A pause, then his tone turned grim. "We've got a critical chemical shipment scheduled for tonight. My crew needs signed safety clearance forms. If it's not you, those rigs are grounded." "That's Julian's problem now," I said. "Or Camille's, if she can digitally manifest some papers." "Yeah," Big Pete said. "No way. We're parking the whole unit. Safety and compliance first. Section 9 billions gives us the legal right." "Strict adherence," I agreed. "Have a good night," he said, and hung up. One domino. I drove to a quiet, dusty diner I knew off the main highway, my command center. Worn vinyl booths and coffee strong enough to strip paint. A place where the people who physically move this country eat their breakfast without calling it a networking opportunity. Margie, the server, topped off my mug. "You've got the look of a woman about to start something," she observed. "I am," I said. "I'm just watching the consequences of bad management." My phone didn't stop. Dispatchers, freight brokers, vendor managers, and repeatedly, Julian's office number. I ignored every call. At around 11 a.m., a text message came from a quiet account manager named Maria, who was known for her baking, not for gossip. "Rennie, are you really gone? Julian is losing his mind. He's claiming you sabotaged the central server. He can't access the vendor portal." I almost laughed. I hadn't touched their servers. I was simply the two-factor authentication contact for a critical login because our outsourced it had set it up that way years ago and never updated it. That verification code was now going straight to my personal cell phone. I typed back. "I didn't sabotage anything. Tell him the 2FA code is live for just 60 seconds. I did not send him the code. I pulled up a public fleet tracking application I'd used for years. National freight trucks were beginning to turn into static red dots on my map. Chicago, Newark. Just outside massive distribution yards in the Midwest, whose security gate codes were changed weekly. Codes I used to send out on a Monday morning. This week, it required a manual reset. I was fairly certain Julian didn't even know the yard had a code. Then a message came from a legal department in New York. "Ms. Miller, this is counsel for Atlantic Heavy Transport. Our drivers are locked out of the National Freight Yard in New Jersey. We're getting no response from your main switchboard. Are we in a state of breach?" I responded. "I am no longer with the firm. Please refer to the continuity clause, Section 9 billions. I have no current authority to grant access." 3 minutes later, another red dot appeared. Around 12:30, Camille called me. I answered out of morbid curiosity. Her voice was a high, tight squeak. "Renee, you have to provide us the security codes. The drivers are threatening to call the police. They're trapped at the gates." "I don't have the passwords," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "They're on your internal servers. If you can't log in, that's a failure in your own infrastructure." "We can't access the server," she snapped. "It keeps sending a code to your phone. Just give me the code." "I'm legally unable to do that," I said. "Sharing secure access credentials with an unauthorized ex-employee is a violation of data security protocols. I'm not committing a federal crime for a company that just dismissed me over a birthday party." she hissed. You're on speaker. Julian's voice cut in, stripped of all pretense, leaving only raw anger. Enough games. Give me the code now, or I will sue you for the damages. You fired me, Julian, I repeated. You told the entire floor I was replaceable. So replace me, go ahead. We called our IT support, he shouted. They said only an admin can authorize a reset. That's you. That sounds like a gap in your agile strategy, I replied. There is an emergency override line, but it's expensive and it takes hours. He began to rant about a cargo of frozen seafood in Miami and the impending spoilage. That was my line in the sand. Not to protect him, but to protect the drivers, the longshoremen, the innocent people in the supply chain. They don't deserve to be collateral damage in a millionaire's ego trip. I quickly texted the cold storage foreman, a man I knew as Doc Sam, someone who had answered my panicked calls at all hours. Sam, I'm no longer with Alliance. The corporate fuel cards for the reefer trucks might get declined. Get the drivers to safe harbor, decouple the rigs, hook them up to shore power, and build the emergency contingency fund we established. He replied immediately. Copy that, Ren. Shrimp stays frozen. We're safe. We won't unload without a valid authorization. Good. The people doing the hard labor were shielded. Julian could drown in his own hubris. With the immediate operational fires contained, I made a call I'd avoided for years out of loyalty to Wallace. Northern Line Logistics was National Freight's main rival. Their regional VP, a shrewd operator named Marcus Webb, had attempted to poach me multiple times. I'd always refused. Loyalty is a two-way street. National Freight had just paved it over with indifference. Marcus answered on the second ring. Renee Miller, he said, his voice a smooth, liquid baritone. Did you finally decide that glue isn't a structural component for a logistics company? I'm available, I said. Let go about an hour ago. A calculated pause. Where are you? At the Highway 9 diner. Stay put? I'm sending a car. One condition, I said. I'm not walking in alone. I'm bringing relationships, port authorities, unions, freight brokers, the entire web. Marcus's smile was almost audible. Then we'll need a bigger conference room. A black SUV pulled up to the diner, looking distinctly out of place. Margie watched as I slid out of my booth. Leaving us for higher ground? She asked. Just changing who's entitled to waste my time, I said. During the ride downtown, industry news websites began to publish alerts. National Freight Alliance was reporting operational outages, with significant loads being dumped on the spot market and yards at a gridlocked standstill. Logistics is uninteresting until it stops working. Then, everyone pretends to be an expert. Marcus met me at a low-key steakhouse. No flash, just hard data and a clear proposition. What's your price? He asked. Title, cash, corner office? I want operational autonomy, I said. A new strategic accounts division. I build it, and I run it without any interference. If I say a load moves, it moves. If I decide to pay a premium to get a driver home for Christmas, we do it. Marcus didn't blink. That's expensive authority? It's cheaper than the collapse you're watching on TV right now, I said. And Alliance is currently imploding. He was about to respond when my phone lit up with a breaking news alert that turned my blood cold. National Freight Alliance vehicle involved in a multi-vehicle collision on Interstate 90. Hazmat spill confirmed. I called Big Pete instantly. He answered with a tone I'd never heard from him before. He was shaken. Ren, it happened. Was it one of your guys? No. Julian hired a non-union temp off a load board because we parked the shipment. The driver took a turn too fast. The rig jackknifed. We have solvents leaking onto the highway. The EPA is already inbound. Due is landing a team in minutes. Is the driver alive? I asked. He'll make it, Big Pete said. But this is a level 5 incident. The DOT will ground National Freight pending a full safety audit. The suspension is immediate. I stared across the table at Marcus. National Freight just ended itself, I said, quietly. Marcus exhaled a long, slow breath. Then the market is about to move very quickly. I had one stop before I would sign anything. I refused to let the rank-and-file workers, the truckers, and the warehouse staff be pulverized by Julian's incompetence. I drove to an off-site records archive that Julian would never think to investigate. A dusty storage facility that only became relevant when lawyers start hunting for someone to blame. I still had the key. I'd always kept a key. I pulled the original indemnity and safety responsibility clauses, the documents signed by Wallace Sterling himself. They made it indisputably clear that active executive leadership bore the responsibility for compliance, not the people they bullied into performing miracles. While I was gathering files, the company's general counsel, a man named Lawrence Stern, arrived. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were weary. "The Dot has seized the servers," Lawrence said. "Julian is barricaded in his office. Camille is posting emotional apologies on social media. The board wants to pay you a lot of money to return and frame this as a simple transition bump." "A bump put a man in the hospital and a toxic spill on a major interstate," I countered. "No, they want you to save Alliance," he said, his voice softening. "For the people, the employees. I'm saving them," I said, "just not for Alliance." Lawrence studied me for a long moment and finally gave a curt nod. "Wallace is on a plane back," he warned. "He will blame you first. Then he can do that to my face," I said, and left. I drove to the private airfield. Wallace stepped off his personal jet, already shouting orders into his phone. He scanned the tarmac for his driver, found no one, and spotted my SUV waiting by the fence. He stormed over and pointed a finger at me like I had personally insulted his entire lineage. "Get in, Wallace," I said, using his first name for the first time in 20 years. It stopped him cold for a split second. Then reality set in. Empty lot, no car, no staff. He got into the passenger seat, his face a thundercloud of fury and confusion. "Drive," he snapped, and explained to me how my company became worthless in a single day. "Put on your seatbelt," I said, pulling out of the airport. "This is a long story, and it begins with your son believing that respect is an option. He accused me of digital sabotage. I'm telling you the truth. Alliance didn't break because I attacked it. It broke because it was built to lean on one person, and that person finally had to step aside." Then I told him about the hazmat crash and the Dot response. That news drained all the anger from him and left behind something older, a deep, weary resignation. As we approached the corporate headquarters, we passed a wall of police lights and news vans. The building looked like a crime scene because in a very real sense it was. At the entrance to the loading docks, Wallace turned to me. "If I fire him, will you stay?" I looked at the concrete where I'd spent half my life. "No," I said, "I'm done." He gave one sharp final nod, a man swallowing a loss he couldn't possibly recover. I reversed the SUV and drove away, leaving him to walk into his burning castle. That evening I signed the contract with Northern Line Logistics. Marcus honored the autonomy clause. He didn't pretend it was friendship, he respected its economic value. Over the next few hours I moved the relationships the same way you move freight, carefully, legally, and fast. Ports rerouted manifests. Brokers switched billing codes. Independent trucking groups followed the person they trusted to ensure they got paid. By the time the sun set, a substantial portion of National Freight's active volume had crossed over to their new home. Then Maria texted me. "Wallace fired Julian. Security walked him out the front door. He was sobbing. Wallace wants to see you." I went back once, but not to return. I went to close the loop. Wallace sat alone in the main boardroom, a bottle of scotch in front of him and the look of a man who had just realized his legacy was just a story until the right people stopped telling it. "You took them all," he said, his voice hollow. "I took the ones who wanted to survive," I replied. "Pay your people. Severance. Final checks. If a single employee's paycheck bounces, I will bring every remaining worker to Northern Line and you'll be left with an empty shell of a company." For a moment, a flicker of his old fire returned. Then he just nodded. "They'll be paid." I turned to go. "You were the best I ever had," he said, his voice raw and stripped of ego. "I know," I said. "That's why my absence is costing you." I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. Late that night, Maria forwarded me an all-staff email that Julian had somehow managed to send before his credentials were completely revoked. It was a frantic tirade, a rant of accusations and abuse, all in caps lock. And he had attached the wrong file to it, Project Culture Budget. It wasn't a budget, it was a detailed map of embezzlement, consulting fees being routed to shell companies for wellness retreats, personal branding, and other expenses that were clearly personal. I forwarded it to the General Counsel Lawrence Stern with a single line: "You might want to call the authorities before they call you." Less than an hour later, I saw the police lights reflected in my window. Officers were escorting Julian out of a trendy local bar in handcuffs. He was shouting about his identity. He wasn't who he thought he was. He was evidence. When I finally got home, Jasper greeted me like I'd just come back from a normal day's work. "Dogs don't care about corporate empires. They just care that you returned." I poured a cheap glass of wine and tried to stop my hands from shaking. Wallace called me near midnight. His voice was shattered, like broken glass. He stole from the pension fund, drivers, warehouse retirees, people who gave me their lives. That sentence hit me harder than any stock chart or headline ever could. "Fix it," I said. "I can't," he whispered. "Accounts are frozen. The fines are coming. If the pension is gone." "You want me to ask Northern Line to absorb it," I said, already feeling the architecture of the solution forming in my mind. Silence. "It will cost you everything," I continued. "You sell the brand and assets of Alliance to Northern Line for $1. We take the fleet, the warehouses, the liabilities, and we make the pension fund whole. You walk away, and you never pretend to run a company from a vineyard again." "My life's work," he breathed. "It's worth exactly $1 right now," I said. "I'm offering you a clean exit and the dignity of your employees." There was a long, long silence. Then, very quietly, "Do it." Marcus wasn't a fan of the sentiment until I translated it into a strategy. Loyalty bought at a discount is often the most valuable asset. A workforce that sees you protect their retirement will work with a ferocity that no inspirational poster can match. Northern Line acquired National Freight Alliance for a symbolic $1 and assumed the pension obligation. The business press called it an unprecedented, genius turnaround. The people on the docks called it what it was: refusing to let the honest workers pay for a rich kid's mistakes. 3 weeks later, I sat in my new office, a space with glass walls and a magnificent view of cranes and shipping containers. Some of the boxes on the loading dock still wore the old Alliance colors with a Northern Line logo hastily stuck over them. It was an honest symbol of how the world works. Brands change, the freight still moves. Julian was released on bail. Camille launched a public relations campaign to frame the whole disaster as a learning journey for her personal brand. Wallace sent me a case of expensive wine I haven't touched. Big Pete sent me a flower arrangement so enormous they needed a pallet jack to deliver it. A letter arrived on pastel pink stationery from a correctional facility. Julian had written it, insisting I was still just a cog in a machine. I looked around at the massive operation I now commanded, at the dashboards that reflected real data instead of rampant ego, and I felt a profound sense of nothing. I fed his letter into the shredder, watched it become confetti, and it was over. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "We've got a vessel stuck at the mouth of a major canal," he said. "I need a reroute strategy in the next 45 minutes. I put on my headset, pulled up the global logistics map, and listened to the familiar hum of the machine. "All right," I said, a sense of calm washing over me. "Let's move some freight. The world doesn't stop turning, and the cargo always has to move."